In 1959, you settle into your seat, windows shade up, and outside the engine is just beginning to spin. You don't know it yet, but the next few minutes are going to feel completely different depending on one thing: which decade you landed in. Because the DC-8 wasn't one experience. It was 3 or 4 different airplanes wearing the same aluminum skin. And today, we're not just going to talk about what the DC-8 was, we're going to sit in it. Phase by phase, sound by sound, from the gate to cruising altitude to the moment the wheels touch back down. Section 1, the gate. Let's start on the ramp because the DC-8 announces itself before you even get close to the door. Ground crew are running a portable start cart. Somewhere behind you, another aircraft, maybe a Constellation, maybe a DC-7, is warming up piston engines that cough and sputter like a diesel truck on a cold morning. That's the sound the traveling public grew up with. Mechanical, uneven, a little bit anxious-making, honestly, because pistons occasionally throw a cylinder mid-flight, and everybody on board somehow knows that. Now you step toward the DC-8, and the first thing you notice is silence. Not literal silence. There's still ground equipment, still activity, but the airplane itself, sitting there with 4 pod-mounted engines slung under the wing, doesn't have that nervous, reciprocating rattle. It just sits, clean, confident, almost too quiet for something this big. That's not an accident, and it's not styling. Douglas hung those engines away from the fuselage specifically so nothing from the power plant would transmit into the structure you're about to sit inside. You're feeling an engineering decision before you've even boarded. Walk up the stairs, duck through the door, and here's the second surprise: space. Douglas didn't just build a tube and stuff seats into it. They talked to airlines first, found out what airlines actually wanted, and then widened the fuselage over a foot beyond what was strictly necessary, just to get 6 seats across comfortably, with an aisle that didn't feel like a hallway in a submarine. It's a cross-section shaped like 2 overlapping circles, wider at the shoulders than a perfect tube would ever need to be. You settle in. If it's the early 60s, you're probably wearing a jacket, maybe a hat, because flying is still an event, not an errand. If you're up front, there's linen on the tray table before you've even fastened your belt. If you're in the back, it's tighter, sure, but even tight on a DC-8 is roomier than most competing jets of the era. Pushback. Then the real overture begins. Each engine lights in sequence. And if you're in an early Series 10 or 20 with the original turbojets, water injection kicks in and produces a shriek loud enough that people back at the terminal windows will turn their heads. Inside, you feel it as an urgent whine building underneath your feet, climbing in pitch as the aircraft rolls toward the runway. It's not violent. It's anticipatory, like the airplane is clearing its throat before it says something important. Then the brakes release. This is the part nobody who only flew piston airliners was prepared for. The acceleration doesn't build gradually, it arrives. You're pressed back into the seat with a steadiness that feels less like transportation and more like being launched. The noise inside the cabin during the roll is loud, almost aggressive, for engines working at full output just a few feet below the floor. And then, rotation. The nose comes up, the mains leave the pavement, and for a few seconds the whole airframe is working hard, engines still shouting, structure flexing slightly under the load. Somewhere above 10, 15, eventually 30,000 feet, something happens that a piston-era passenger has never once experienced in their adult life. The shaking stops. Not lessens. Stops. The vibration that used to run continuously through the floor, up through your shoes, into your knees, it's simply gone. A cup of coffee sits on the tray without a ripple in it. Someone 2 rows back says something in a completely normal speaking voice, and you hear every word without leaning in. If you'd flown a DC-6 or a Constellation a year before, this is the moment it clicks. This isn't a nicer version of flying. It's a different physical experience of flying, one your body has never registered before. At cruise, the cabin has its own signature soundscape, and it changes depending on which engine variant is under the wing. On the early turbojets, there's a steady, high-frequency whine, more noticeable if you're seated toward the back, near the wing or aft of it. It's constant, but by the standards of the day, it sounds modern, almost futuristic, not intrusive. Fast forward to the series 50s and 60s with the JT 3D turbofan, and that whine softens into something rounder, less piercing. Fast forward again to the 1980s, when General Electric's CFM56 gets bolted onto the surviving Super 60 airframes to beat noise regulations that were about to ground them entirely, and the cabin experience changes again, dramatically. Passengers who'd flown the older 61s described the CFM56, powered Super 70s, as almost eerily quiet by comparison. Roughly 70% quieter, in fact. Conversations near the back that used to require raised voices now happened at a whisper. Same shape of airplane. 3 completely different acoustic worlds, separated by 20 years and one engine swap. Descent reverses the whole sequence. Power comes back, the whine drops in pitch, ears start popping, and somewhere below 10,000 feet the airframe starts picking up the texture of the air again. The ride roughens slightly as you re-enter the atmosphere the piston generation never escaped in the first place. Touchdown. A jolt, spoilers deploy, and then, on the older turbojets especially, a sudden, room-filling roar as thrust reversers bite into the airflow to help slow 4 engine's worth of momentum down. It's loud, physical, and completely unlike anything a propeller airplane ever produced on rollout. So what did it actually feel like to fly the DC-8? It depended entirely on when you boarded. In 1959, it felt like being shot into the future. In 1968, on a packed Series 61, it felt like a genuine trade-off, bigger but louder, and airports were starting to notice. In 1983, on a re-engined Super 70, it felt almost like a new aircraft entirely, quiet enough that you'd forget you were sitting behind 4 jet engines at all. But across every single version, every decade, every airline, the sensation people described first every time was the same one. You sat down, the wheels left the ground, and for the first time in your life, the floor stopped shaking. If you want to go deeper into how decisions like fuselage shape, engine placement, and power plant design actually translate into what a passenger feels and hears, that's exactly what we get into in Flight Unveiled. Links in the description. Thanks for flying along on this one. See you in the next video.